Our second lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him, and calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In December of 1952, a toxic mix of dense fog and sooty black coal smoke descended on London, England for 5 days. Deep darkness covered the city. Daytime visibility fell to about 1 foot. Roads were littered with abandoned cars. Some said they couldn't see their own feet when they were walking. Midday concerts were canceled due to total darkness. Archivists at the British Museum found smog lurking in the book stacks. Movie theaters closed because the patrons couldn't see the screen. This environmental disaster took 4,000 lives and made ordinary life nearly impossible. Despite the dense, dark fog, however, Oxford and Cambridge universities decided to carry on with their annual cross-country competition by positioning marshals along the track who would shout out, this way, Oxford and Cambridge," as runners materialized out of the thick haze. Have you ever felt like you were lost in a fog, unsure of the way forward? Have you ever had to figure out what to do next when the next step on your path was unclear? The story of the Magi, these wise ones from the East, is, as my colleague Amy Miracle says, a short story which creaks under the weight of subsequent embellishment. Although the text doesn't specify, it is, you might say, a bit foggy on the details. Over time, people have added specifics, declaring that there were 3 and giving them names. But the actual text doesn't tell us that much about the Magi. But it does make clear that what compelled them to journey to a foreign land to visit someone else's king was a tiny pinprick of light in the night sky, a star. Though they didn't know where this star would lead them, when they saw it, they knew deep down in their bones that they were supposed to follow it, even if doing so would be like walking through the great smog of 52. My friend Jennifer is a Presbyterian minister. Recently, she shared with me that every year during Advent, as the Christmas story gets told and retold, she tries to figure out which character in the story she most identifies with in that particular year. This year, Jen is a few months into a new position as an interim associate pastor, and she's serving a church that feels very different, both in their theology and worship practices, than any church she's served before. Her sense of call to that congregation and even to ministry itself is feeling more than a little foggy. But in addition to being a minister, Jen is a trained yoga instructor. When she started this interim position, she began offering a Monday morning yoga chapel service, which combines yoga with worship. She has been surprised and delighted that every week the service grows and new people attend. This year, she told me, I feel like the Magi in the Christmas story. I don't really know where God is calling me next, but the one thing I'm clear about is that I'm called to use yoga in my ministry. Right now, yoga is my guiding star. When we are lost in a fog, all it takes is the smallest point of light to offer us enough guidance to keep us moving forward. A guiding star can be a value like compassion or equity or justice, or a practice like yoga or meditation or prayer or scripture reading. But when we're trying to figure out if the star that's guiding us comes from God, one question to ask is, does it call us to action, as the Magi's star called them to go on a journey? When the Tuesday morning Bible study group discussed this story a few weeks ago, one of the things we talked about were the verbs in the text, the words that describe the actions of the wise ones as they make their way toward Jesus. They came, they asked, they heard, they set out, they saw, they were overwhelmed with joy. They entered, they knelt, they paid homage. They offered gifts. They went home by another way. Putting all these verbs together at once got us thinking that the wise ones didn't just bring gifts to Jesus of gold and fancy perfume, they offer us a gift as well. Their gift to us is a pattern of the life of discipleship, a pattern that is revealed by the verbs in this story: come, ask, hear, see, enter, kneel, go. As we navigate our journeys of faith, especially when we're not sure where the next step will take us, the example of these wise ones can be like a voice cutting through the fog, like the voices guiding those Oxford and Cambridge runners through the haze. Their example teaches us that in our journey of faith, it actually isn't our beliefs that matter as much as how we act on them. In fact, this story tells us nothing about the beliefs of the Magi. We know they weren't Jewish, they couldn't have been Christian. From all those action verbs, we know they were searching the heavens for signs, and when they saw the star, they were ready and willing to move, to act, to respond. When they finally arrived at Jesus' bedside, they acknowledged him as king without understanding who he was or what he would go on to do. Like the disciples who will come along later in this story, the wise ones respond to God's call even when the path is unclear. They act before they believe. How would it look for you in this new year to be less concerned about what you believe and more focused on whatever star God has given you to guide you forward in your journey? It will be a star that calls you to action, actions of justice and generosity and compassion after the example of Jesus. The journey of faith never begins with belief, but with openness, with courage, and with movement, even when the way forward is less than clear. On this journey, the verbs of the Magi become our verbs: come, ask, hear, see, enter, go. And if the verbs of the Magi are our verbs, then their journey is also our journey, which is to say, we don't know for sure where it will lead us. Unlike the map applications on our phones, there's no way to press a button and to zoom out on our lives and see an overview that shows us exactly how we're going to get from where we are to where God is calling us to be. We throw around phrases like journey of faith or spiritual path, phrases that make it sound like we have a turn-by-turn plan for getting from here to there, when in fact, we are all mostly stumbling through the fog. Annie Dillard, the writer, offers an astute description of the spiritual path. She writes, "Spiritual path is the hilarious popular term for those night-blind mesas and flayed hills in which people grope for decades on end with the goal of knowing the absolute. They discover others spread under the stars and encamped here or there by watchfires, in groups or alone in the open landscape. They stop for a sleep or for several years and then move along without knowing toward what or why. They leave whatever they find, picking up each stone, carrying it a while, and then dropping it gratefully and without regret. For it is not the absolute, though they cannot say what is. Their life's fine, impossible goal justifies the term spiritual. Nothing, however, can justify the term path, except one thing: they don't quit. They stick with it. Year after year, they put one foot in front of the other, though they fare nowhere. Year after year, they find themselves feeling with their fingers for lumps in the dark." The good thing about fumbling around in the dark is that when it's really dark, a little light goes a very long way. Author E.L. Doctorow once said that writing is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. The Magi remind us that on this journey of faith or spiritual path or whatever you want to call it, our first task is to pay attention, so that when God puts a guiding light before us, we notice it, we see it, and we take the next step forward even when the rest of the way is unclear. Like the wise ones on this journey, we are called to ask questions and to hear the answers, and possibly to rechart our course when we learn something new and unexpected. Notice that the Magi went first to Jerusalem, the capital city, the seat of political power. They showed up at Herod's palace because they were looking for a newborn king. And where else would you find a king, if not in the palace? But Herod sent them to Bethlehem instead, and they went. And when the star led them to a baby born not in a palace, but a stable, and not to royal parents, but to the poorest of the poor, they trusted the guidance of their star and knelt down to worship him. Ultimately, the wise ones show us that this journey with God, foggy and unclear as it might be, is transformative. Living these verbs leads to moments when the fog suddenly dissolves and we see things clearly, if only briefly. And these are the moments that change us. Just like the Magi, who, when they left Jesus, went home by another way, when an experience has truly transformed us, there is no going back the way we came. So come, ask, hear, see, enter, kneel, go home by another way. Once you find your guiding star, follow it. Take the first step and then the next one and then the next. Keep moving forward along the path God has mapped for you. Yes, more often than not, it will be a path enveloped in fog, but this doesn't need to be bad news, because in the thickest darkness, all it takes to light your way is the smallest pinprick of light, just enough for you to move forward, step by courageous step. For the light that guides us is none other than God, who has promised to be with us through the murkiest night, with us every step of our journeys. Amen.